천재 수학자가 주식 투자를 한다면 어떻게 될까요? 여기 CAGR 연평균 수익률 66%를 기록한 천재 수학자 짐 사이먼스가 있습니다. 천 사이먼스 이론으로 물리학계에 길이 남을 업적을 남겼고 이후 르네상스 테크놀로지를 창업하여 헤지펀드 매니저가 된 짐 사이먼스. 천재 수학자와 과학자들이 월스트리트를 평정했습니다. 천재 수학자이며 투자에도 천부적인 능력을 보여줬던 짐 사이먼스. 그의 인생과 투자 이야기 함께 시청하도록 하겠습니다. 알파 컨덕터 채널 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정하시면 최신 영상을 가장 빠르게 시청하실 수 있습니다. 알파 멤버십에 가입하시면 알파 컨덕터의 포트폴리오 편출입 전략을 채팅방에서 실시간으로 받아보실 수 있습니다.
You took that amazing mind, and having been a co-cracker at the NSA, you started to become a co-cracker of the financial industry. I think you probably didn't buy efficient market theory, and somehow you found a way of creating these astonishing returns over 2 decades. I think the way it's been explained to me, what's remarkable about what you did was that it wasn't just the size of the returns, it was that you took them with surprisingly low volatility and risk compared with other hedge funds. So how on earth did you do this, Jim?
Well, I did it by assembling a wonderful group of people. When I started doing trading, I had gotten a little tired of mathematics. I was in my late 30s. I had a little money. I started trading, and it went very well. I made quite a lot of money with pure luck. I mean, I think it was pure luck. It certainly wasn't mathematical modeling. But in looking at the data, after a while, I realized, hey, looks like there's some structure here. And I hired a few mathematicians, and we started trying to make some models. Just the kind of thing we did back at IDA. You design an algorithm, you test it out on a computer, does it work, doesn't it work, and so on.
So can we take a look at this? Because I mean, here's a typical graph of some commodity or whatever. I mean, I look at that and I say that's just a random up and down walk, maybe a slight upward trend over that whole period of time. How on earth could you look at that and see something that wasn't just random?
It turns out in the old days, and this is kind of a graph from the old days, commodities or currencies had a tendency to trend. Not necessarily the very light trend you see here, but trending in periods. And if you decided, okay, I'm going to predict today by the average move in the past 20 days, there's 20 days, maybe that would be a good prediction and I'd make some money. And in fact, years ago, such a system would work. Not beautifully, but it would work. So you'd make money, you'd lose money, you'd make money, but this is a year's worth of days, and you'd make a little money during that period. But it's a very vestigial system.
So you would test a bunch of different sort of lengths of trends in time and see whether, for example, a 10-day trend or a 15-day trend was predictive of what happened next?
Sure. You would try all those things and see what worked best. But the trend following would have been great in the 60s, and it was sort of okay in the 70s. By the 80s, it wasn't such a
It didn't, because everyone could see that.
Other people did.
So what happened? So how did you stay ahead of the pack then?
Well, we stayed ahead of the pack by finding other approaches and shorter-term approaches to some extent. But the real thing was to gather a tremendous amount of data, and we had to get it by hand in the early days. We went down to the Federal Reserve and copied interest rate histories and stuff like that because it didn't exist on computers. We got a lot of data and very smart people, and that was the key. I didn't really know how to hire people to do fundamental trading. I had hired a few. Some made money, some didn't make money. I couldn't make a business out of that, but I did know how to hire scientists because I have some taste in that department. And so that's what we did. And gradually these models got better and better and better and better.
A lot of people look at the hedge fund industry now and are sort of shocked by it, by how much wealth is created there and how much talent is going into it. Do you have any worries about that industry and perhaps the financial industry in general kind of being on a runaway train that's I don't know, helping increase inequality, or how would you champion what's
Well,
happening in the
actually,
hedge
I
fund
think
industry?
in the last 3 or 4 years, hedge funds have not done especially well. We've done dandy, but the hedge fund industry as a whole has not done so wonderfully. The stock market has been on a roll going up, as everybody knows, and price earnings ratios have grown. So an awful lot of the wealth that's been created in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 years has not been created by hedge funds. So it's just another, people would ask me, what's a hedge fund? And I say, 1 in 20. I mean, which means now it's 2 in 20. It's 2% fixed fee and 20% of profits. Hedge funds are all different kind of creatures.
Rumor has it you charge slightly higher fees than that.
Charge higher fees. Yeah. We charged the highest fees in the world at one time. 5 and 44. That's what we charged.
5 and 44.
Yeah, 5% fixed fee,
5% flat, 44% of upside. But
yeah.
you still made your investors spectacular amounts of money.
We made good returns, yes. People got very mad at my investors. How can you charge such high fees? I said, okay, you can withdraw, but no, how can I get more was what the, how can I get more? But at a certain point, as I think I told you, we bought out all the investors because there's a capacity. There's a capacity to the...
But should we worry about the hedge fund industry attracting too much of the world's great mathematical and other talent to work on that, as opposed to the many other problems in the world?
It's not just mathematical. We hired astronomers and physicists and things like that. I don't think we should worry about it too much. It's still a pretty small industry, and in fact, bringing in science into the investing world has improved that world. It's reduced volatility. It's increased liquidity. Spreads are narrower because people are trading that kind of stuff. So I'm not too worried about Einstein going off and starting a hedge fund. Well, the short talk is this. I did a lot of math. I made a lot of money, and I gave almost all of it away. That's the story of my life. Now, it's a good story, but it's short. So, when I was a little boy, I liked math in the sense that I liked to, when I was 3 or 4 or something, like to double the numbers 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. I got up to 1,024, and I said, enough of that. But I like doubling numbers. And when I was a little boy also, I was in my father was driving me, and he said he has to go to a gas station and get gasoline. I said, why do you need to get gasoline? He says, well, the car needs gasoline. I said, but you shouldn't need to have to get gasoline. You could just use half of what you now have, and then half of that, and half of that, and half of that, and you'll never run out of gas. Well, that was called Zeno's paradox, but of course it didn't occur to me that we wouldn't get very far either, but there it was. But I did always like math, and I went to MIT, and I took a graduate course right in my freshman year, which was puzzling to me. It was abstract algebra. But during this summer, I figured it all out. I got a book, I figured it all out, and then took a lot of math courses at MIT. The field that I really liked was called differential geometry. How many of you have ever heard of differential geometry? Okay. The old folks know about differential geometry. Well, differential geometry is a study of curved spaces in many dimensions typically with a metric on it, so you can see how far apart any 2 points would be. And I really liked that field. And, well, I went to Berkeley to get my, well, I graduated MIT in 3 years, so I stayed as a graduate student for a year. And then they told me, you should go to Berkeley. And I said, why should I go to Berkeley? They said, well, the great man in your field, differential geometry, a man named Chern, is just going to Berkeley, and you should work under Chern. So I said, okay. So I went out to Berkeley. Regrettably, Chern was taking a sabbatical leave that year, and so he wasn't there. So I worked with someone else, and that worked out fine. It was interesting working with this guy. I came up with a little theorem, and I showed it to him, and he said, oh, that's a nice little theorem. It puts in mind an open question, which I won't really describe to you, but don't work on that question. I said, why? He said, because it's too tough. This one worked on it and tried, and that one worked on it and tried. Well, of course, that just sort of got me going, and I said, okay, but I'm going to work on this problem. And, well, I did, and I solved the problem, and I was very pleased with myself, and went back to teach at MIT and Harvard. But for reasons which I won't go into, I needed money. And I had borrowed money to invest in a company with some friends of mine, and I needed to pay it back. But there was a place in Princeton called the Institute for Defense Analyses, which was a highly classified place under the aegis of the government, the Defense Department. And what we're supposed to do is break Russian codes. Well, that was an interesting challenge. I liked the work. They told us you could do your own mathematics up to half your time, but yet the other half you had to do, this code cracking business. Well, at a certain point, I came to Stony Brook University. I was 30 years old, to be the chair of their math department, which was not a very strong department. And I was pretty young to be the chairman, but I thought it would be fun. And I had a lot of money to work with because the governor at the time was a guy named Rockefeller. Now, I think everyone has probably heard of the name Rockefeller, but has anyone not heard of the name Rockefeller? Okay, most of you have heard of Rockefeller. Rockefeller loved the State University and was pouring money on it, so I had a lot of money to work with, and hired some terrific people. But at the same time, in that time frame, I started to get interested in another area of math. And I worked on that area and came up with something really quite beautiful in 3 dimensions. It was a function, I can't really describe it, but it lived in 3 dimensions, closed 3-dimensional spaces. And I was quite pleased. I showed it to Chern. I showed it. I sent it by the mail, because in those days there was no email. And Chern said, well, you've done this in 3 dimensions. but it should work in all dimensions. I was very dubious, but I said, okay, let's work together and see. And he was right. It would work in all dimensions. And I was very pleased. We published the paper. And about 5 years later, a physicist named Witten saw this paper and thought, and he was right, it could apply to physics. And then some other physicists saw how it could apply to physics. I didn't know any physics at all. Chern might have known something, but it never occurred to him that it would apply to physics. And remarkably, so you never know where something will go. You think you're doing math and you're actually doing physics, or maybe, or whatever. So today, that is called Chern-Simons theory. It's all over the place in physics. On average, every day, 4 papers in physics reference this Chern-Simons theory. So I can't take any credit for it at all, but there it was, and of course, I'm quite pleased about it, but I can't say that, oh, I invented this for physics. Well, shortly after that, I started to get interested in the world of investments. I had come into a very small amount of money, but it was enough to start investing. And one thing led to another. I started hiring people, and we made what was called a hedge fund, and it was remarkably successful. It's still going. I'm not with it anymore, but I made a tremendous amount of money from this hedge fund. Now, my lovely wife, Marilyn, said, let's give some of it away. So I said, okay, fine. So we gave some charity. And then she said, well, why don't we start a foundation? And okay, start a foundation. She started a foundation. I put money into it. The good thing about putting money into a foundation is you can give the money away. You get the tax advantage, but it doesn't have to be spent immediately. So you can put money into the foundation and say, well, we'll see what we want to do with it tomorrow or next year or whatever. But it grew and grew and grew. So today, we decided to focus on science with our foundation. Focus on science. 90% of it should be science. 60 of that should be basic science, and 30 of that could be translational science, and 10% could be education and outreach and things like that. So today, that foundation is extremely large, and so most of the money that I made was put into the foundation. So I'm not so rich as I was before, but rich enough. And we had this wonderful foundation, and running it most of the time was my wonderful wife.
짐 사이먼스에 대해 알아보면서 인상적인 내용이 있었는데요. 인터넷이 대중화되기도 전에 도서관 구석에서 과거부터 그 당시까지의 금리와 같은 온갖 레어한 데이터들을 직접 찾고 수기로 작성해서 모델에 집어넣어가며 끊임없이 보완해 나가는 끈기와 집념을 보였다고 합니다. 짐 사이먼스는 르네상스의 메달리온 펀드의 분석을 얼윈 벌캄프와 함께 했는데, 벌캄프 역시 짐 사이먼스처럼 퀀트 투자 알고리즘 개발에 집중하고 있었습니다. 벌캄프의 아이디어는 메달리온 펀드의 알고리즘이 좀 더 초단기 전략을 써야 한다는 것이었습니다. 기간이 짧을수록 패턴 예측이 정확할 가능성이 높아졌고, 짐 사이먼스는 벌캄프의 의견에 따라 투자 종목 보유기간을 일주일에서 1시간으로 줄였다고 합니다. 보유기간이 짧은 대신 충분한 수익을 내기 위해 큰 레버리지를 써서 짧고 크게 먹는 전략을 썼는데, 이 전략이 결과적으로 대성공했다고 합니다. 르네상스 테크놀로지와 짐 사이먼스는 경제 위기 때 빛을 발했는데, 2008년 리만 브라더스 금융위기에 르네상스 테크놀로지의 수익률은 무려 152%에 달했습니다. 1988년부터 30년간 연평균 66%를 기록하며 엄청난 투자 레코드를 쌓아온 짐 사이먼스인데요. 짐 사이먼스는 월스트리트 전문가를 채용하지 않고 수학자와 과학자, 이공계 관련 전문가들을 채용해서 월스트리트를 평정했습니다. 이미 알려진 투자 전략들로는 시장에서 초과 수익, 알파를 내기 힘들다는 얘기일 수도 있겠죠. 월스트리트의 전문 투자자가 아니더라도 자신만의 영역에서 정점을 찍을 만큼의 전문성과 집요함, 분석력 등을 갖춘다면 세계적인 투자자가 될 수 있음을 짐 사이먼스가 보여주었습니다. 우리도 이런 집요함과 투자 마인드를 갖춰나가며 짐 사이먼스의 정신을 이어받아야겠습니다.